We're still in Wesch lesson 5. We're talking about the history of the world, basically, since the Roman Empire. The global economy, it's derived from European colonialism, which was designed using European economic models. So we have the origin of feudalism in ancient Europe. Classical Europe goes up until about 500 uh, uh, CE, the Common Era, we say 500 AD, and then after that is sort of medieval Europe up until about 1500, and then we have early modern Europe to the present modern Europe, basically. So prior to 500, we've got the Romans, the origins of feudalism in ancient Europe, the impact of Roman rule. So prior to Roman conquest, Europeans were tribal with some chiefdoms. So the tribes and the chiefdoms we have at the peripheries. Here, let's get a picture of that. Here's Rome down here uh, in uh, in Italy, and then you have the Roman Empire, which stretches. Let me try to get us up a little bit. Stretches up as far as uh, the Hadrian's Wall here across England, the Great Britain. So south of that, you have basically Roman Empire, but it's very much sort of a chiefdom area. And then north of that, you have Caledonia, you have Scotland, which is tribal, and Ireland, which are also tribal. Northern Germany versus southern Germany, um, etc. So these are the tribes and chiefdoms, and then this is part of the empire. And really, these places are a lot of chiefdoms as well. Very often, Gaulish chiefdoms and other chiefdoms that are under the rule of Rome. The other part of the world is different, of course. This is Carthage, ancient civilizations here in Africa. You don't have that same sort of lack of prior existing civilization. Of course, in the Middle East and Turkey, you have Troy, you have Mesopotamia, Persian empires, etc. But in Europe, it's very much tribal and not very highly developed. Okay, so under Roman rule, some cities developed, but the economies were never very developed until after the fall of Rome. For example, um, some of these cities were developing between 150 and 500, and so as Rome continues to fall, even after Rome has fallen, the cities continue to develop. If you want an image of this, you can watch King Arthur, the movie with Clive Owen. It's a pretty decent medieval movie, lots of swords and such. And it's also pretty historically accurate to how the actual historical King Arthur might have lived um, maybe 500 years before he was placed there by Mallory, with the High Middle Ages with the knights in shining armor and all that. That was not the historical guy. The historical guy was many, many years, 500 years before that um, in England. Let's see. The other image that we have of Rome, you may have watched the Gladiator, and that's where Gladiator is. He's a Roman general. He's from Spain. He's the Spaniard, even though he's a professional military. So he's probably recruited as a child from Central Asia as tribute, as a slave, taken to Italy, schooled in the military academies from the age of 6 to 16, and then conscripted into the army for 20 years. And by the time he's 36, he's retired out at whatever rank he achieved. And so if he retired as a master sergeant, he gets a gold coin. If he retires as a captain or a major, he gets like a little shop. And if he retires as a general, as the Gladiator did, as Russell Crowe did, he gets an entire estate in Spain, which had just been stolen from the tribal people of Spain and given as trophies to the generals. And then, because he's a responsible person, he gets recruited back as a general to go fight against the hordes of Germany, the tribes and chiefdoms of Germany. up in here, and then he goes back trying to save the life, but they're killed. So he's sold into slavery in North Africa and then brought back as a gladiator, blah, blah, blah. In any case, so we can see here that that the generals are given newly conquered lands, and when they get those lands, they get the estate that Russell Crowe had, a big, beautiful house, and then they get the right to the labor of the people living around there, who are native Spaniards, but he, of course, is from somewhere else. And it's slavery. They are agricultural slaves, and they have to do that work. So that's called the manorial system. Manors in the provinces were given to Roman political and military leaders. Manorial lords under Rome became assimilated into tribal and chiefly hierarchies after Rome fell. So if Russell Crowe had not had his estate taken from him, but instead had gone back and had lived out his life, married to the local daughter of the local chief, and eventually his children, would grow up, and grandchildren, great-grandchildren would be intermarried with these local chiefdoms that existed before. And then at some point Rome falls, and so no longer, you still have the Roman roads, but you no longer have the Roman army protecting those roads. And so that manor is suddenly open to attack from roving brigands. And so they build walls around it and raise a militia to defend it. And next thing you know, you've got medieval Europe. The manorial lord becomes an actual earl or duke or viscount or whatever, as there's a loss of central leadership, and it's every man for himself. So Christianity tied society together loosely, especially by maintaining an alternative ownership structure to the kings and lords based around monasteries. But feudalism was the basic economy here, a system based on land tenancy. So Russell Crowe's descendants are down there in the valley, and they say, yes, we are bosses of our entire valley. And then the guy up on the hill who says, my army is 10 times bigger than yours, my castle is 10 times bigger than yours, I'm just going to come and destroy you unless you recognize that I own your land and that you rent it from me. And so Russell Crowe's descendants, of course, say, yes, of course, we owe you a 10% share or 20% or whatever of all the crops that we get. We're going to pay them to you, and you are our duke, and we are your earl or viscount or whatever. And then, of course, the duke is on his mountain, and the king, 100 miles away, says, hey, I'm going to come and destroy you unless you recognize that all of the land that you own is actually my land, and you, Duke so-and-so, your army of 10,000, I have an army of 100,000, and I will destroy you unless you say this. So the Duke says, okay, it's all your land. So eventually the land comes to belong to the king, but he permits these lords to control it in exchange for military allegiance and a share of the annual crop. Serfs, the workers who raised the crops, were permitted to keep a portion of the crop in exchange for their labor. So, as a result, we have European feudal society growing out of this, 800 to 1500 in the Common Era, or you could say AD. AD means Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord, which is a little bit difficult. It's easier for Muslims to say easier because Jesus is, a very respected person in Islam, but harder for Jewish people to say because Jesus was just a rabbi to them. So we say Common Era instead of Anno Domini. It's the same date. It's just a little kinder to the non-Christians among us. So we have knights. These are younger sons of lords who could not inherit the real estate. This is the law of primogeniture. Primogeniture meaning first child or first son, specifically here. The law that only the eldest son had to inherit the entire estate. So the younger sons owe their allegiance to their lord, but they could also work as mercenaries. Why would we have primogeniture? And here I'm going to attempt to draw on the screen here. And I'm going to draw a picture here. We'll see if this works. So I'm going to draw an estate. This is maybe 100,000 acres worth of land that the person has, and he's got his little castle over here, We'll see if we can do this here. Okay, so this is the king, and he's got his castle, and he has 4 sons, and so he splits up his estate into 4. Instead of giving it all to the oldest son, he splits it into 4, and the oldest son gets the big castle, but a much smaller piece of land, and the second son, and the third son, etc., and the fourth son, and they get their land, and they build their little castle here, and so we've got this fourth son, and he's got his castle, and he's got 4 sons. Why did the king not let the dukes divide up the land like this? So then we have a duke here, and he divides up his land this way. Whoops. And so he has 4 sons, and so this son builds no longer a castle because there's just not enough land, oh goodness, left. I think that just the design there. And he's just got a house now. And he divides his land up into 4. And what does he end up with? Much smaller and smaller pieces of land. So instead of having 20 square, 100,000 acres here, you end up with smaller and smaller plots. And eventually you end up with all of the descendants owning land, but none of that land being very powerful. Why is this a bad thing? This is a bad thing for control. So if you have a society structured on dominance and with slavery, and people forced to work the land, do stuff laboring that they hated, and give away the majority of their food to the king or to the boss up on the hill, and you want to keep that system going, it helps to have no more than a dozen or maybe 2 dozen enormously powerful dukes who are also very, very rich and very powerful and have armies, and they can keep the thing going better than if you have 100,000 smallholders, all of whom are pretty independent and have enough wherewithal to defend themselves against you. We don't want that, right? So we don't want those yeoman farmers when we have very unequal societies. Okay, I'll stop it there.